All right. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Let's go ahead and get started. So thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to our Brands Alliance Budget Season webinar series. I am your host, Joe Vitorino, the Executive Director of Strategy at Planned Companies. I oversee the Alliance, and I'll be guiding you through our webinar series here today for our final presentation. The Brands Alliance is a consortium of top-tier property service providers, including AmenityLinc, American Pool, CertaPro Painters, Heartline Fitness, Live Unlimited, Paul Davis Restoration, and Planned Companies. As best-in-class service organizations, we collaborate to enhance the client experience and improve the quality of life for the residents and tenants that we proudly serve. By sharing our expertise, best practices, and value-added services, we're able to elevate the standards of property management. So this afternoon session is our final day and our final session of our exciting budget season webinar series. Today we'll be focusing on property technology. We had our morning session at 10 a.m. and again, this is our final one today, focusing on the condo and HOA world. All these webinars are recorded for your convenience and can be viewed on demand online following each webinar. This morning session can be found on the AmenityLinc website, and this one will be as well. Before we dive in, we want to encourage everyone to feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A button below. Questions will be gathered by me throughout the webinar, and we'll review them together at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Adam Chen, President of AmenityLinc, to present our budget season webinar presentation on property technology. Prior to Adam's role as President of AmenityLinc, he served in senior technology roles in government contracting, finance, marketing, and leading change initiatives for companies serving the real estate industry. Adam, take it away.
Thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. To kick things off, you have to think about strategy when you're thinking about budgeting, right? A budget is just numbers, but it needs to come from something, and it needs to drive towards some goals. So what I'd first like to focus on is some key property technology benefits. And as you're thinking about the landscape here, think about technology a little bit differently than you think about your traditional vendor service providers, right? Property technology has the benefit of really cutting horizontally across some of these other vendor verticals, right, to deliver some of these benefits across the board, right? So you're selecting technology ultimately to perhaps streamline some of your operations and realize some efficiencies at scale. Perhaps you're looking at reducing costs. Can also certainly help with, adherence to compliance and ESG mandates, right? We also know that staffing is a big challenge in our industry right now, right? So making their lives easier, right, will help you both attract and obviously retain your existing staff and high performers. And then finally, also, we want to make sure that we're adding value to residents. They're paying dues, right? They expect a certain level of service, and we know residents can be difficult with a wide array of needs and wants, right? So we want to make sure that we're delivering that value to residents to keep them happy. And ultimately, that makes staff's lives easier as well. So a good way to think about, we obviously sell SaaS software as AmenityLinc, but we do try to take a very consultative approach, and hopefully that rings true throughout this presentation. The first thing I want to kind of set the stage with here is that we all have computers in our pockets, and the reality is over half, the majority of web traffic, search results all happen on mobile devices nowadays. So I think it's a foregone conclusion that many communities have a website, right? It's a need. It's not even a question anymore. The question I would ask, associations and property managers that serve associations is, do you have a mobile app, that's representative of everything you might share on a website? All right. I think that's a good place to start and think about that, because we all have a computer in our pockets 24/7, right? We want to be able to meet people where they are. That's the goal, right? How do we make communications, right, easier with our resident populations, right? So that's one thing we want to take a look at is, are we taking a mobile first approach? And there's a lot of incumbent softwares out there, right, that are legacy and maybe really haven't adopted that, that thought process yet. So as you're looking across the technology landscape, consider that as a kind of a key tenet. Throughout this presentation, we're going to hit on a couple of different points, right? And it's all going to conclude with, how we, come together with a budget, right? And I know we're about to enter that budgeting season right after Labor Day here. So hopefully this is timely and valuable to all of you out there that's joined today. First, we're going to talk about the landscape. There are a lot of tools out there. I know it can be difficult and it's daunting. So hopefully we can help provide some guidance there to help simplify that for you. We also want to talk about, change management, right? And there's a very specific order of operations that we want to take whenever we're implementing a new piece of technology, right? That's property technology or really any technology. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about SaaS, right? Software as a service, what that means, and how can you make sense of some of that. There's also a process around requirements gathering and how do you make decisions and procurement decisions, right? Especially when, you might have a board that's made up of people from a wide array of industries. Perhaps this is not, general practice in their day-to-day lives. So we have some tools that we're willing to offer, through our consultations. And, I'm happy to give anyone that's joined this webinar a free, initial consultation and share some of these materials that we walk through today. We're going to talk a little bit about the pace of change, right? The world is changing and it's changing quickly. So we want to be able to stay on, kind of the cutting edge of that, right? Ride that wave a little bit. And this is all going to conclude with our strategic budget methodology. So first, let's take a look back at that ecosystem, right? There's been I think in 2022, over 20 billion in investment in property technology alone, right? The cost of capital has been cheap over the past decade. So there's been a proliferation of new solutions, new companies that have come on the scene, right? It's daunting, right? There's a lot of choice out there. And the reality is there's a lot of overlapping functionality out there, right? So a good way to kind of simplify all those choices that are out there is to think about it in these 5 buckets, right? There are some technologies that help you with that operational efficiency, right? There's some things that are very experiential, right? Enable other things to happen, right? There's also automation and workflowing tools, right? Things that might streamline processes, right? There's also obviously financials that we have to consider, right? And risk management, right? There's a lot of tools out there to look at that. Additionally, there's also the core of all technologies to gather data, right? There's a saying in technology circles that data is the new oil, right? And gathering first-party data is that much more important. So if you're managing one property, maybe you're in a master plan that has multiple properties, the more that we can aggregate that data, the more insights that we'll have that'll improve operations moving forward. Now, within each one of those categories, there's still, again, a number of different types of tools. And there's a lot of buzzwords that you hear, like blockchain, with crypto, right? Or AI, right? Or virtual reality and things of that sort, So there's a lot of those buzzy things, right? And that's what I think a lot of technologies want to sell you on, all these bells and whistles. But the core of what you need to do is understand the core of your business and what are the tools that'll help you, facilitate, your business so you can stay focused. McKinsey has a stat that's quoted in a variety of different circles, right? That 70% of enterprise change initiatives fail or, don't meet, I guess, the desired outcomes ultimately. So what we're going to talk about is how you might approach, a technology procurement decision, right, in a particular order so that you're not a part of that 70%, right? So the first thing is you have to make sure you have the right people, right? You have the right alignment, you have the right buy-in, right? We have a couple different stakeholders here in the association world. We've got, property management companies. We have the variety of vendors that we first looked at on the initial slide. And then we have a bunch of volunteer board of directors who, thankfully give up some of their free time, right, to help improve things, right, or hopefully. So we first need to make sure that everyone's aligned, right, and is bought into the benefits and why we might embark on a change initiative, right? Not all change initiatives or technology are rooted in technology, but I would say implementing new technology, all of that is change, right? So we want to make sure that we've got that alignment. The second step is then to define process, right? We need to make sure that we understand standard operating procedures, right? And if you don't have standard operating procedures, let's define what that is at this phase, right? We need to do that to ensure this ultimate successful rollout of the software that we choose. We need to be able to map that technology that we're choosing to our specific needs at our property, right? Or our association or our property management company, right? And there's a lot of variability within there. The other things from a budgeting standpoint we have to think about is ultimately, change management. You know, we often look at the hard numbers when associated with technology, right? Licensing fees, implementation fees, right? The things we often overlook is, time budgets, how long it might take to do that, right? Training materials and time to do that. Perhaps that also involves, travel. People learn in different ways. Are you accounting for the folks like to self-study versus the folks that like to maybe be in a classroom type setting, right? We have to really take a look at how we might roll that out, account for that budget with our time and our costs, right? And then finally, once you have all that documented and all that figured out, that's when you start the technology selection process, right? What works for the community down the street might not work for your community. You really need to look internally. It's not about just what works for others. You really need to look at your own individual people, the skills you have, and then the processes that you have and the goals. So software as a service, or SaaS, if you're not familiar, right, is kind of the new model of building software, right? And I run into this question in almost every conversation that I have. Everyone's looking for the easy button, the old Staples button. They want an all-in-one solution that just works, that just does it. The reality is the all-in-one solution really doesn't exist. Not in the way that you're thinking about it, right? It's really a trade-off between specialization, right, and simplicity. I think in the world that we live in, because resident expectations have risen, right, we need to meet those expectations or exceed those expectations. What that often means is we need very specialized software to facilitate very specialized needs of our communities, right? That's where best in class comes into play. But, right, when you go best in class, you're often working with multiple tool sets. And what that means is you need to integrate those tool sets so that they work seamlessly, they work efficiently, right? And there is an expense to maintaining those integrations. So we have to account for that. And we'll talk a little bit more about where that expense lies a little bit later on in this conversation. There are a lot of incumbent softwares out there, I will tell you, that, position themselves as being an all-in-one solution. And while they might, have that breadth of coverage, the reality is they don't go very deep in certain areas. And that's where those integration points come in. Maybe they have some of their products that are very good, right? And that's where we want to make those integration points. But other ones, not so much. So you really need to look at, what are your goals and benefits in the community? What's the staff that you have? And the reality is in every, engagement that I have, it's a mix of the two, right? Like really you want to make sure that you're delivering on the needs of the community, right? Don't just always look for, what's easy, because it's often not going to meet your specific needs. And then with SaaS and finding SaaS partners and procuring technology from other companies, look at it as a partnership ultimately. SaaS is what we do, right? This is technology. We stay up to date on current best practices, industry trends. We learn from different verticals within the real estate industry, and we can bring that back. That's the value you have by partnering with SaaS companies. And it also allows you to focus more on your specific mandates, right? What you want to focus on is managing your community, right? Not necessarily managing a whole bunch of technology, right? So look at that. Look at the flexibility. Look at the evolving change. And I know with boards, you have a turnover, right, every couple of years, right, of new folks. So I think partnering with outside companies too helps with that business continuity. You'll have these external partners you can lean on, right, and reference when you perhaps take a new board position and you want to understand why things were chosen, and you want to limit the disruption whenever the board changes over. And then finally, right, like we also want to look at your annual operating expenditures, right? Even when, like, technology is a journey. It's not I buy this thing and I set it and forget it. It's not I buy this thing and now the thing's solved forever. The reality is technology is always changing. So we do have to account for the adoption of new technology. Now, where you save some money is you don't have to develop that functionality yourself. That's what the SaaS company is doing, right? That's why you're paying a license fee. But what you can do, right, is you still need some ownership internally to say, we have a new feature. How are you going to apply that at your property, your specific property? So you still need some expertise that you need to budget for, some responsibility assigned to someone on site that they can make the most of the technology you've bought. Ultimately, that's what we want. We want to deliver an ROI on this investment that you've made. Okay. So one thing we do here at AmenityLinc, and it's right in our name with amenities, is we're trying to follow this trend, right, of lifestyle, so to speak, right? People want this live, work, play lifestyle. A lot of new communities are built that way. And then if you add in, the desirability to have this, resort style living at your property, you also have this other pool from hybrid work, right? COVID changed the way we work. And communities can help differentiate themselves by offering not only, luxury style amenities, but also these amenities that facilitate a work from home type lifestyle, right? And that's really what AmenityLinc is riding the wave on, so to speak. And we're trying to facilitate and help companies as they grow into these new capabilities. How can we be your technology partner of choice? Right. You're making a ton of investments in these spaces, whether that's a co-working space, outfitting a new gym, updating your pool, right? You got to make sure that you're activating those amenities and getting the ROI out of those massive capital investments. So let's get further down into process here a little bit. Right. We've kind of how people kind of translates into process. So one artifact that we use in our consulting engagements is called a RACI chart. It's a roles and responsibilities matrix, right? And Gartner, a big IT, research firm, has this stat with 59% of organizations that are fully successful in achieving their strategic objectives, right? They have clearly assigned responsibilities across their enterprise. That's key, right? And that's what some of these artifacts can help, kind of model out for you and your organization. But as we get into the processes, we also need to gather requirements, right? And it always starts with functional requirements. And these are those business owners or the folks responsible for certain divisions. Maybe it's your property management staff. Maybe it's the regional director, right, overseeing the property management company. Or maybe it's the board of directors, right? Like it could be any of these stakeholders. But firstly, what we need is we just need to write in plain English what it is that we need to accomplish, right? That's step one. Step two then is to take that as an input, right? And it's a prerequisite to then defining technical requirements. And that's where you have some subject matter expert, someone, that's rooted in technology or IT, right? To then take those functional requirements, understand your property technology stack. Do you have a mix of best in class tools and some other kind of like all-in-one solutions? And how do we make that systems architecture work and talk together, right? That's the technical requirements piece. Some of that you can certainly, leverage partners such as ourselves to do, right? But if your property management company has IT teams and, a technology focus, right, they might also have some of these resources, right? Finally, then we kind of get into the decision-making structure. Like once we have these requirements, how do we evaluate, the options that are presented to us, right? And that's where I would always recommend, some formal committee or some formal process, right, that we can do to make that decision. That committee, I know many boards have, event committees and pool committees, and think about a technology committee if you don't have one, right? Maybe have some folks that are in IT on your boards, and maybe have some folks that, aren't as comfortable with technology, so you can really take an objective lens, right? Too often I see in procurement decisions bias creeping in, right? And it's the decision-making power is consolidated to one or a few, right? I think it's very important, right, that we don't let that bias influence these technology decisions because they are large decisions. They will take effort both on the vendor side, costs, as well as change management and, time on the property management side or the board side to understand this, to make sure that it's adopted and communicated out to the community, right? So make sure that you challenge each other and make sure you make the right decision, because if we're talking about cost savings, the most costly decision is making a wrong decision and having to repeat that decision. So take the time, budget for that time and that expense up front to make sure you make the right decision. Now, we do also offer, we have a template set up for a weighted decision-making framework where we can take a lot of our requirements and then mathematically, kind of calculate and help with that decision-making process. One thing to think about with technology, and I kind of alluded to it before, but it's a journey, right? It's never done. there's this quote here that we have that change has never been this fast and it will never be this slow again. The pace of change is accelerating, and a version of this quote has been cited by many different folks in many different industries. Really what we're talking about here, though, is how do we adopt the right mindset so that the technology adoption and change management process is accepted, right? And if you're not familiar with this concept, look up Carol Dweck. She's an academic and author. She came up with this concept of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, right? Take a hard look at your organizations, your board, your property management companies, right? Do you have a growth mindset? And all that basically is saying is, am I excited about potential for change? Will it make things better? Do I take an optimistic lens at that? And do I realize that there's no upper limit to, the improvements I can make? Versus something like a fixed mindset where you're like, this is the way it is, I'm scared of the change, or I don't want to, make this update because of this, right? I think I hear very often in a lot of my conversations, well, I ask why you've done it this way. And the answer comes back is, well, we've always done it that way. That's a clear signal to me that we still have a fixed mindset. And that's always a signal for me to let's take a pause and let's think about the world. Let's think about what this actually means and the benefits of it before we start proceeding, right? And it's that we need to budget for too, the unexpected. And we need to make sure we account for making sure everyone's on, got the buy-in and understanding before we kind of jam technology down somebody's throat, right? And that could be the board members. It could be your residents. And it's why communication is so key and underpins a lot of this change management. So now let's get into the meat. We're here to talk budget. So how is all of this planning, impact your budgeting strategy? So most of our clientele, I would say, would fall within mid-size enterprises, right? So Gartner would define that as, companies with an annual revenue between 50 million and 1 billion. And in that group, right, IT spending as a percentage of revenue sits around 4.95%. What I can tell you is that real estate as a whole significantly underinvests in IT and research and development costs, right? Now you've seen this chart, I think, in some previous webinars if you've joined, but these are some categories that you might typically find in a property management budget, right? There's the property management fees, right, that the board's going to have to kind of weigh in on. There's, of course, insurance and legal costs, utility costs. There's the variety of vendor services you might third-party manage, and outsource, or maybe you have some internal staff that helps you manage the property. And then finally, you have this technology bucket, right? It's almost a disservice to say that technology is just off here to the side as one bucket, because as we mentioned at the outset, right, technology has the ability to impact all of these categories in some positive way, right? If we think about it the right way. So how do we think about that? We think about technology and dividing that one bucket into really 4 categories, if you will, right? We've got technology that helps facilitate growth. We have technology that helps facilitate operational excellence. We have technology that facilitates a resident experience, whatever that might mean to your property. And then we have technology that helps with compliance, right? And governance, things of that sort, right? So these, again, are a couple templates that we use in our consulting engagements. Again, I'm happy if anyone reaches out to me after this to set up an initial consultation and share some of these templates. Hopefully it'll be of use to all of you. So when we're actually looking at the budget itself, right, we're using those same 4 categories. And I think the key things to take away here, right, are you want continual spend on some level on each one of these categories every single year, right? Don't just think of it as one line item in your budget. Technology has subcategories to it, right? So the question that you should be evaluating annually is how much do we allocate to each one of these buckets, not whether we invest at all. I think the second way to slice this is also, right, boards are in charge of hiring property management companies to manage their properties. Right, having a good understanding of what technology a property management company might come to the table with, right, in that evaluation process is huge, right? And property management companies Also, would be prudent to say, like, what are the association needs across our entire portfolio, right? So that we can make strategic technology investments so that we can serve the breadth, I guess, of our portfolio that we're trying to manage, right? Flipping it back to, the association and the board audience here, right? I think the other question you need to ask yourself is, again, what the property management company brings to the table, and then what you might need to procure independently. And when we sell our services, right, we help navigate some of these questions, right? But we obviously also sell independently to both of these groups. We sell directly to property management companies. We also sell directly to associations. I think the point here is to reduce overall technology spend. Let's just be wise to leverage the tools that are provided to us at no additional fees, and only spend and procure additional tools when that specialization is needed, so that you can differentiate your offering, keep residents and occupancy rates high, et cetera. So this is just a sample of percentages. This is not to be meant as a benchmark by any means. This is very bespoke to every single property and engagement that we go through. And that really concludes the meat of our presentation. This kind of shows our consultative approach, as I mentioned, at the beginning of the talk, and all of the artifacts that we use, we're happy to share with our clients, as we go through it. We ultimately look for long-term partnerships. We want to be your trusted partner to help you and your companies grow, right? Improve your operations within your association, or maybe you're still in the building phase, right? And how do we make sure that that's seamless for all your new owners that come into the community? And likewise with property management companies, we know it's a challenging job you're in, and we want to help take the burden off and give you some reliable solutions and reliable partners to grow with, right, as you continue to expand your business. So with that, I thank you for joining, and we can open it up for questions, Joe.
Great job, Adam. Great presentation. A lot of great takeaways. I'm sure the audience members here enjoyed it, and hope you guys got a lot of great takeaways from it. Like Adam mentioned, we're going to open it up to Q&A. We have a few questions that were asked during that presentation, and feel free to add yours in below as well if you have not already. So Adam, question number one. Let's see. So if we refer back to the all-in-one solution slide that you showed before, if we decide to go with a best-in-class approach, that means we need integrations, correct? How should we think about that?
Yeah, and I'm not sure who asked if you're on the property management side or the board side, so I'm going to give you kind of two different lenses on that, I suppose. If you're on the board side, I would say, this is why you hired a property management company, right? We know boards aren't going to have in-house IT department, right? So the influence you have is making sure you select the right property management company, or if you're procuring the technology directly, right, making sure you're choosing the right partner. I think on the property management side, though, right, these are some of those value add services that you can help provide, which differentiates yourselves to the communities you serve. Right, leverage your internal IT teams, or maybe you have partners such as AmenityLinc or other companies that you can lean on to help manage some of those integrations, right? I think the world is increasingly complex, and the more and more new communities that we serve, the more and more we learn and how we have to improve our product. So again, that pace of change is going to constantly change, expectations and requirements. So, lean on your property management companies, or if you're a property management company, have those difficult conversations with your IT department, figure out what their strategic roadmap is. Right, and how you can start leveraging these integrations, right, so you can provide that value back to your communities, and they don't have to deal with it.
Thank you, Adam. Great explanation there. The next question we have here is, it seems like every vendor I work with has some sort of technology, and I have my own technology tools on site. How do I decide what to use at any particular property, considering this is in our area of expertise?
Yeah, I think this really comes down to just making sure you select the right partners ultimately, and kind of what we ended on there about not trying to, have duplicative tools. I think it's unavoidable to a certain aspect, and when there is duplicative, tool sets, like one of the things is many of these technology platforms have some level of like communication involved with it, right? I think some of this comes down to what's the easiest one to use, what's the easiest one to train your staff on, right? So yes, there's best in class when it comes to functionality, but I would also take the other look about it about, ease of use and ease of training, right? Because that's what's going to ensure usage, and that's what's going to ensure the value you get out of it. And by going through that selection process, maybe a couple of these other softwares that you might already have might fall by the wayside. I think, a lot of these property technology tools, as they evolve, we have, the luxury of, simplifying, and reducing the tech stack for some people. So maybe if you're going on this communication example, I run into things like MailChimp or Constant Contact on a regular basis, right? Does it make sense for you to pay for this other tool just to send out a community newsletter when there's a lot of other tools that have that capability already baked in and much easier to use? So I think it's really having that level of understanding and having partners that'll, guide you there in a lot of ways.
Well said. All right, it looks like our final question. So here we go. It seems like every time we try something new with technology, it causes stress on teams and might take longer than promised. What can we do as an organization to make things easier and more cost effective?
Yeah, I think in the association world, I mean, we've hit on obviously a lot of points of that throughout this presentation. I think one of the root causes I see that causes some disruption, and it's certainly challenging for us vendors serving too, is when boards change over, when you have different opinions and different goals and different, so when that happens, right, it kind of throws all these vendors in a tizzy. Like, what do we do to kind of make sure that there's some continuity here, right? We don't want to cause disruption on the property. So I think some of this, quite honestly, is just taking a longer time horizon in your planning, and maybe on your boards and your board structure, there's some other elements that get introduced. We offer, multi-year contracts in the technology space because that's a way we can help save costs. The flip side to that, though, is maybe, the board that is now using the software had no say in procuring that software in the first place. So I think those are some of the challenges you got to think about. When it takes longer, what those stresses are, people have change fatigue, so it is good to take a long-term horizon, a long-term view of this. So you're not constantly running your residents and your staff through these constant changes just because of there's a new whim, from a board member, right? So however you do that, I think it gets very complex, of course, right? But some kind of business continuity planning exercise within boards, especially during board transitions, I think is very important.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Adam, for that answer and for all of your answers, as well as the questions from our audience today. That's going to conclude our Q&A session, as well as conclude our budget season webinar series. So just want to say one final thank you to everyone who joined, whether for today's sessions, the morning sessions, or any of the 3 previous sessions that we did with our other brands. The Brands Alliance thanks you. Again, this recording and everything will be available online at the AmenityLinc website, as well as on the brandsalliance.co website. So that way, if there's anything that any of the brands that you saw today or in the last couple of weeks can do to you, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. And we look forward to communicating and working with you guys all soon. So have a great one, guys. Thank you very much.